Till Forgotten. A story written by Tofaz. Charge! The white unicorn stopped midway in his charge as he was forced to pull back by a barrage of fluffy projectiles. Catching one of them, he flung it back to its point of origin. A gentle thud could be heard as the projectile hit a sturdy built castle made from big-sized books and blankets for a roof. Adjusting his helm, he pushed a strand of his blue mane away from his eyes as it glared towards the small fortress in front of him. "Your fortress cannot save you forever, Magistrate Sparkle." From within the book fortress, a small giggle emitted, before a small purple head poked out of the gate. "My defenses are impenetrable, evil dusk armor. My kingdom will never fall." Her horn glowed with a mild violet hue as she levitated yet another pillow, radiant for launch. Shining Armor grinned as he dodged the red object that was set to kill. "You're out of ammunition. Give up magic." He felt a hard thud against his chest as he was flung back by a small purple magistrate. Crashing into the couch behind him, he lifted a helm from over his eyes and stared into Twilight's face. A grin split across the small filly's face as she poked her horn in her brother's chest. "I will never surrender. Bam! You're dead, Dusk Armor." He struck his hoof up in a melodramatic gesture. "Arg! Foiled again!" He tilted his head to the side while he let his tongue slip out. Bouncing around, Twilight laughed. "Yay! I won!" "Twilight, Shining, dinner!" Twilight jumped off of Shining's chest and landed in the doorway. "Yum! Mommy made a casserole. Come on, Shining. We can't let it cool off." Shining lay motionless with his back against the couch. He heard the sound of small hooves hitting the cushioned floor. Feeling a small muzzle nudging against his sides, he jumped up. Boo! Twilight's jaw dropped as she jumped back, hitting the wall with her flank. Her eyes grew as big as dinner plates as she now saw her archenemy risen from the dead. She leaped out the door and ran down the stairs as she giggled. "Mommy, Dusk Armor have risen from the dead. He's going to eat me." Shining smiled as he decided to follow his sister down the stairs, hobbling as he groaned. "Not even death could stop me, Magistrate Sparkle." Standing at the bottom of the stairs, their mother frowned towards him. "How old are you exactly, Shining?" He froze a second before he smiled towards his little sister that hid between their mother's legs. "Curse you, Magistrate Sparkle. You found my only weakness. Irritated mom." The mother rolled her eyes before she let go of a sigh. "Let's just eat, shall we? I swear, you will never grow up." Shining's eyes followed as Twilight sat down before the table while she giggled. He smiled as he sat himself down across his sister. "I will never become too old to be a brother." "I was afraid you'd get too old to play my silly games, but you didn't." "Twily, where are you?" Shining Armor rummaged through his room while levitating a scorched suit above his head. He turned his head as he heard small sobs coming from under his bed. Peeking under, he saw his sister huddled together in one of the corners, refusing to make eye contact with him. He stretched his hoof under the bed and smiled at her. "Come out, Twily. I'm not mad at you." Twilight looked at the hoof that was offered to her with tears running down her cheek. You're not?" He shook his head. "No. Now come on out." Twilight grabbed onto the hoof and followed it out as he yanked it, tossing her up in the air and catching her with a cradle-like grip. He lifted the suit in front of her before he ruffled her mane. "Look, Twily." He pointed at the burns on the suit. "Someday you can do this as well." His horn started to glow brightly, engulfing the cloth. The scorned fabric started to mend, until a short time had passed and it had returned to its original state. "See? The damage is all gone." Twilight gasped. How did you do that? He placed her down and smiled. It's a secret. She sniffled as she sat down. I'm sorry I almost broke your suit. Shinan sat down next to his sister. Look, Twily, I don't care about the suit. But you must promise me to never do that again. It could have been dangerous. She rubbed her hooves in her eye, wiping away the tears that had welled up. But I wanted to surprise you. I just wanted to be good as magic as you. Standing up, he looked down at his sister. And you will one day, but for now, you should wait till your horn is fully developed. Now, want to race me down to the kitchen and get some ice cream? Grinning from ear to ear, she jumped up and nodded, Yay! Before running between his legs and down to the kitchen with a giggle. I was afraid you would get angry at me for destroying your suit, but you didn't. I'm home. Shinan shut the door behind him as he entered the house. He made his way to the kitchen. He stared at the small foal who sat enraptured in her own little world, tinkering with the tiny tea set, placing cups in front of a gray doll. As Shinan approached her, he heard small giggles coming from his sister. Pouring some tea, she shook her head at the doll. No, Mr. Smarty Pants, that would be silly. Shinan smirked. What are you doing, Twily? Twilight jolted together as she heard his voice and murmured, Nothing. He sat down over by Twilight and nodded his head at the doll. Who's your friend? She scraped her hoof along the table. This is Mr. Smarty Pants. He keeps me company while you're gone. He smiled towards Twilight. Well, Twilight, it's awfully rude of you not to introduce me to your friend sooner. And I think I'll take a cup of tea as well. Twilight beamed up and grinned ear to ear, giving Shinan a cup and poured some tea for him before she ran over and grabbed the doll, huddling it next to her, before she giggled towards her brother. Mr. Smarty Pants wonders how your day was. Shinan chuckled as he started to tell of his day while drinking some delicious tea. I thought you'd find me silly for having an imaginary friend, but you didn't. Shinan! Twilight rushed through the gate of her school and leaped into her brother's arms. He held her tightly before ruffling her mane. Did you have a nice day at school, Twily? She giggled as Shinan placed her down. Yeah, we learned a new spell today, and I even got to borrow a book. You want to read it with me when we get home? He smiled at her as they started making their way home. I would love to. Twilight stopped and looked at her brother's back before she squeaked. Shinan, how long is it till you won't have time to pick me up from school anymore? Turning around, he looked at Twilight with a brow cocked up. What makes you think I won't have time for you, Twily? She scraped her hoof along the road. It's just that you're enrolling at the officer school soon, and that means you can't be here with me. Placing her on his back, he smiled. Don't you worry about that, Twily. What use is it to be a guard if I can't be there for my own sister? Remember that, Twily. I will always have time for you. I feared that you would stop picking me up after school, but you didn't. Come on, Shinan, let's play. In the backyard of their house, a unicorn stood around on a freshly cut lawn. He turned towards his little sister, which sat in the corner under shadow. He smiled as he shook his head. Not now, Twily. I need a practice for my entrance exam. Twilight smiled at her brother. Oh, I'll keep you company then. The little unicorn made her way next to her brother and sat down with her doll next to her. She turned her head and tilted it a little to the side before she spoke up. Is this fine? Shinan let go of a chuckle as he smiled towards his sister. How can I say no to that adorable face of yours? A shade of red sprung to Twilight's cheeks. I'm not adorable. He chuckled before he turned his sight forward, focusing on the spell needed to get into the officer academy. I thought you would tire of having me around, but you didn't. A knock echoed through the library. Twilight forced herself out of bed as the assault on her door continued. Wobbling down the stairs, she rubbed her hooves in her eyes. She levitated a small candle in front of her. It flickered with an orange glow as she neared the door. As 3 more knocks hammered on her door, she frowned as she yelled, "I'm coming! I'm coming!" I bet you are. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of wind, forcing the candle to die out. The smell of wick filled the air. A white unicorn stood still outside, letting the wind tuft his blue hair to the sides. He coughed before he smiled. "Hey, Twily!" Twilight's eyelids hung heavily over her eyes as she blinked and let go of a yawning. "Hi." "Shining." A grin smeared itself over Shining's face before he let go of a laugh. "Did I wake you?" Twilight rolled her eyes before she added inside, "No, it's completely normal to be up in the middle of the night." Closing the door behind him, he said, "Well, knowing you and books, one can never be sure." Twilight giggled as she embraced her brother. "You're right. Now, what does actually cause you to come at this hour?" He held her at a hoof distance, and a small frown manifested itself upon his face. "I'm afraid I have to cancel our dinner tomorrow." Twilight made her way to the table which stood in the middle of the room, engulfed in one of the chairs with a dim violet glow, dragging it out and sat herself down, indicating for Shining to sit. Before she cocked up her eyebrows and looked at him. "That couldn't wait till morning?" He shook his head before he sighed. "I would wait if I could, but I'm leaving as I exit through this door." Twilight cocked her brows up as she stared at her brother. "What are you doing, though?" He rubbed his hoof along his chin as he pushed forth a crooked smile. "Nothing important. Just going on a scouting mission with a few new recruits." She laughed as she stood up and made her way to Shining. "You're a terrible liar, Shining, but if you can't tell, you can't tell." He frowned. "I'm sorry, Twily." Twilight embraced her brother before she calmly said, "Don't worry about it. We will have time when you get back." Shining gave Twilight a quick peck on her forehead. "I'm glad you understand." "See you later, sis. Love you." A small thud echoed through the library as she closed the door. Only the faint snoring of Spike could be heard. She sighed while a smile drew itself over her face. "That brother of mine, always busy." You put up with me, loved me, and you protected me. There were lots of things I wanted to make up to you when you returned. The night was clear over Equestria. The moon illuminated the plains with a dim white light. All over Canterlot, ponies had turned in for the night. Only the young were out this late. Owls could be heard nestling in their trees looking for their next meal, while hooting at ponies that might intrude on its nightly hunt. Small cats slinked through tiny gaps in fences or buildings. On a hilltop, behind the Canterlot castle, a lonely pony sat huddled over a grave. Small gusts of the night sent ripples through her gown and mane. The pony shivered as the cold of the night nipped at her. She lifted her head slightly as she heard the sound of hooves approaching from behind her. She stroked her hooves over her eyes before she muttered, "Hi, Celestia." Celestia stopped in her path as she heard her students say her name. Swallowing hard, she tried to speak. Her mane weaved itself in the wind that cast itself over the plains. She felt the grass brush against her naked hooves as it shifted from side to side. A tear trickled down her cheek as she approached the hooded figure in front of her. Twilight turned her head facing Celestia, her lips tugged back before dropping down into quivers. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "Where's your crown?" Celestia held back a gasp as she saw her student's face. Deep bags manifested under the bleak eyes that looked at her. Her bright violet mane and coat were covered in soot, making it almost impossible to see any other features in her face other than the cheekbones that shot out. She took a deep breath as she felt a lump build up in her throat. The lump grew to the point that it hurt to swallow. Opening her mouth, she felt her lips tremble. "I left it inside. Twilight. I'm not here as your princess, but as a worried friend. Please, come inside. You haven't eaten in 3 days." Twilight turned her head facing the grave in front of her, running her hoof over as she whispered with a dry, crackling voice. I miss some Celestia." She felt a stabbing pain in her chest, and the lump in her throat burst. Drops fell down to the ground from rivers under her eyes. She clenched her teeth together between her sobs. Celestia's voice wavered as she spoke. "Twilight, please forgive me." Shaking her head slowly, Twilight responded with a hollow voice. "I don't blame you." Celestia stood still, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. She bit her lip before she almost yelled out, "How can you not? I'm the one who sent him there!" "He knew the risks, and so did I. He did what he loved to the very end, protecting every pony he cared for." Twilight faced Celestia, pressing forth a small smile. "If you don't mind, I would like to be alone a little longer." "But it's my fault, Twilight. It's my fault that he's..." Twilight let out small erratic sobs as she turned to face the gravestone. "I choose to believe that a pony isn't dead before the pony is forgotten, and my brother will live with me as long as I live. Please, Celestia, let me mourn a little longer. You don't have to worry about me. I'll be fine. But, please." Celestia clenched her teeth together, stopping herself from protesting further. "Very well. I will wait for you inside when you are ready." Twilight sat still while listening to her teacher's footsteps fade away. Left alone, she ran her hoof over the engravings at the stone. Her body shook as she sobbed. Touching her horn at the surface of the stone, she muttered to herself. "I'm sorry I didn't say it, Shining. I wish I could have said it before you left. I love you too." But you didn't.